Today, Grinding Gear Games released the new and changed gems for Path of Exile 322 Trial of the Ancestors. And this is the post I've been waiting for, since 14 new support gems potentially means 14 new playstyles, or maybe at the very least 14 new builds. Alright, so with the teasers, things like Devour support, we probably knew there weren't quite that many builds, but it is interesting to see the exact numbers for level 20 quality gems. This isn't necessarily an exhaustive list of everything these supports are going to be useful for, and if you have any interesting ideas, do be sure to put them down in the comments below. Also, we haven't seen alternative qualities, so there could be some interesting possibilities there. However, I think it's pretty safe to say that this covers the bulk of the information about the new gems. And before I get into the new ones, updated. Cremation now has the orb tag, temporal chains got a small nerf, poison builds are fine. Realistically, that nerf only makes your DPS look worse in PoB, you were rarely actually hitting the numbers in PoE. This is also why poison PoBs look so big, and your damage sometimes feels, well, insignificant relative to a PoB DPS. Whirling Blades is now more compatible with dual wielding. Ruthless is all ailments instead of just bleed. Still no gold yet though. And Combustion went from a strength gem to a strength intelligence gem. Now here we've got the new gems, starting with controlled blaze support. When I first heard about this, I thought, oh, you want a really fast attacker that hits a ton of times, like Molten Strike. But Controlled Blaze is exactly that, controlled. You don't want to just stack infinite attack speed. This is a strength support, which gives chance to ignite, and each supported skill deals 14% more damage with ignite for each ignite inflicted recently up to a maximum of 364%. Now, to inflict the full 26 recently, assuming 100% uptime, that's a little under 7 attacks per second. With the little more realistic uptime, you're looking at about 10 attacks per second. Here's the problem. The gem doesn't end there. Each supported skill deals 3% less damage for each ignite inflicted with it recently, up to a maximum of 78%. Which means the faster you attack, the more damage you gain, and the faster you attack, the more damage you lose. And you need to find an equilibrium point. Or you could say that you need to control the blaze. Luckily, people have already done the math on this, and it's between 11 and 13 ignites, which, depending on your attack speed and how much uptime you have, is a very achievable 3 to 4 attacks per second, or probably more realistically, about 5 attacks per second, since you won't be standing still the entire time. Though, if you go over 13, you do risk losing a little bit of damage, so increase your attack speed with caution. So I don't think Controlled Blaze is going to be good for Molten Strike. Molten Strike hits that off of 2 attacks, 1 if you're lucky. And you're definitely not going to have 1 attack per second Molten Strike. So instead, this is for medium attack speed slams or possibly strikes. It'll work pretty decently with Earthquake, since Earthquake double hits, and Ground Slam could already hit reasonably quickly. So these are both very good options in the slam department. In the strike department, you actually want a slower strike rather than a faster strike, with lower attacks per second and higher damage per hit. I don't think even Ignite Prolif could carry Heavy Strike, though I'm sure there's someone out there who's willing to try. So instead, I'd look for more middle-of-the-road kind of strikes, possibly something like Infernal Blow, although I don't know how the charge and secondary damage actually interacts with this. But in theory, if you can get that Ignite super juiced by the rest, it could make for an interesting playstyle. And Ignite Prolif will help to carry the skill's clunkiness, much like how Explosive Arrow Ignite Ballista does with that skill's, well, let's just say weirdness from having to build up and detonate fuse charges. Is this a miracle gem that is saving melee? I don't really think so. But does it potentially make melee Ignite more viable and unlock new playstyles? Absolutely yes. So this one should see some use. Next up, Corrupting Cry, which I was very skeptical for, and I'm still very skeptical for, because it has 601 base physical damage per second on the corrupted blood inflicted by your Warcries. It inflicts 4 stacks, which is quite nice and should let you clear smoothly, but the supported Warcries only inflict corrupted blood on the first enemy hit by an exerted attack, rather than all enemies hit by an exerted attack, meaning that you're going to have to wait for single target damage if your Warcry goes down, or on clear, if your Warcry's on cooldown, you'll probably want to support multiple of Corrupting Cry. That's going to limit the number of supports, and also this doesn't scale off of spell damage at all, which means it's even harder to scale than Corrupting Fever because you're losing a single gem. Note, Corrupting Fever does not scale off of spell damage. It's just a comparison that Corrupting Fever gets 5 support links, whereas Corrupting Cry gets 4, since the Warcry itself takes up 1 link. And all you get for that is 4 stacks of a debuff when clearing. Oh, and a very long cooldown. Now, to go over to PoEDB, let's look up a level 20 Corrupting Fever. 335.5. This has 601.5, which is approximately double. Now, Corrupting Fever has absolutely insane scaling for higher gem levels. I mean, at level 30, look at this. 1,112. Is this going to have insane scaling? And if so, how do you even scale it? Because it's not an active skill. So you can't just support it with something and go, oh, look, Empower. I don't know. Corrupting Cry is interesting, but very, very, very clunky, and probably too clunky to use in most setups. If anything, this feels like a one-off that you throw into your build to add just a little bit of extra damage while you're already using a fully functional setup. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm very willing to be wrong on this one, because the numbers are quite good, especially if you think about how Corrupting Blood can stack 10 times, which is almost 6,000 base damage. But then again, Corrupting Fever isn't all that insane, especially on a single target. Great at clear, don't get me wrong, but it's great at clear because you can apply it easily to everything with a skill like Kinetic Blast or Tornado Shot. This is limited by your Warcry cooldown, your Warcry radius, and only being able to apply it to one enemy with your attacks that are exerted really makes this limited. Next up we have Flamewood support, which is its entire new archetype, and this feels like the Explodey Totem we have at home. On the one hand, it is not nearly as powerful as Explodey Totem, because you can't do the whole trap limit thing to exceed your totems, causing them to die instantly, causing them to explode. On the other hand, it deals base fire damage equal to 137% of the totem's max life, which can be a quite massive amount even after the totem life nerf that we saw as a direct result of Totem Forbidden Right. So, if you can get enemies to hit your totems enough, especially if your totems taunt, this does look quite interesting. But it has a 1-second cooldown, and it's relatively limited in its applications. You're either going to be playing a Flamewood Totem build, or you're not. And if you're not, you have very little use for this, because totem life is going to be a dead stat. You're not really going to want your totems to get attacked, or maybe they're just taunting stuff off of you, etc., etc. This also has a lot of tags: support, totem, spell, AoE, fire, projectile, trigger, so it should be really easy to scale, and that's something else that makes me hopeful for this being a build archetype people will actually play. If only the Chieftain was a little bit more friendly to non-dot fire damage, because he's kind of a perfect totem ascendancy. Then we have Guardian's Blessing, which we already knew quite a bit about. It's another way to get a free aura. Sort of. Because this time, it's a free aura that deals 14.3% of a minion's maximum life per second, well, maximum life and energy shield, while the aura from a supported skill is on you. If that minion dies, it's deactivated. No, you can't support Herald of Agony, and no, you can't support any other invulnerable minion. Your minion has to be able to be damaged by the effect. This is an interesting one, but I don't know how many builds are going to run a minion just to use it. So instead, if you already have a minion in your build, and that minion has excess survivability, maybe it's an animated guardian that really shouldn't die unless you misplay or run just the absolute wrong map and disable its regen, well, this is a pretty good way to get a free aura into your build, and my understanding is that, like Eternal Blessing, you don't have to hit the button except at the start of your map, which is a huge plus for me personally. The thing I don't like about a lot of blessings is they require constant maintenance. So if I ever have a minion, I'm definitely going to be using Guardian's Blessing support. Or maybe trying it and finding out my minion dies too much, but, we'll see. Overall, this is the most broadly useful one that we've seen so far, but stay tuned, some of the later ones are also quite good. Another really interesting one is Trauma support. My original speculation was it functioned like Trauma from Bone Shatter, dealing physical damage to you and causing you to do more damage per trauma. Instead, it deals physical damage to you and causes your attacks to have added physical damage per trauma. Now, you will still have to worry about the damage you take. It lasts a very nice 6.9 seconds. It also limits your skills to only be used with axes, maces, scepters, or staves. but the damage it gives is quite insane, especially if you have Fizz taken as Ellie or conversion to multi-dip. Maybe Nebulok Juggernaut is actually coming back, though if you're using Molten Strike, I'm not quite sure how you'd clear. To answer another popular question of, will this apply to Bone Shatter and can you double up? No, supports melee strike skills that do not inherently apply trauma, so you can't double traumatize yourself. Unless you play hardcore, in which case you should probably hug Roas and then hug Goatmen, and you'll be doubly traumatized before you've even gotten halfway through Act 1. Or any skills used by things other than you, and it cannot modify minions. There's really no way around cheesing this one. You've just got to use strikes for yourself. The two weapons that stand out to me are maces and axes. Maces because of things like Nebulok, Frost Breath, Brutus Lead Sprinkler, though I guess Brutus Lead Sprinkler doesn't really need more added damage. Axes just because they're a fairly good weapon base and used with a wide variety of skills. I'm quite tempted to start this, or at least experiment with it in a Juggernaut that I play as a different type of League starter. If I end up doing that and you're curious, well, get subscribed and you'll see it pop up in your feed sooner or later. And then we have Volatility support, which supports any attack skill. So not just melee this time. Supported skills deal 58% more maximum attack damage, but 69% less minimum attack damage. This is a Rizlathus coil on steroids, and I would guess the effect stacks to double multiply. This increases the range of your damage, and thus increases its randomness. However, take a look at lightning skills for a second. If your lightning skill has 1-2x damage, then you're going to be multiplying off of a quite wide range. Now, most attack skills with a weapon don't just have the 1 to X. You end up with a little bit of extra fizz, maybe some flat damage from something like Hand of Wisdom in action. Overall, your range is tighter than you'd see on a lightning spell. But there is still that effect where your minimum damage isn't as important, and overall this is going to shift the average up rather than shift the average down. Because if you have a really high minimum damage, there is actually the concern that this could shift the average down and make your skill less effective. Use with caution, but I think Volatility support is very strong and quite good to have as an addition to the game. It does something interesting mechanically, along with just adding, well, a lot of damage when combined with Rizlathus coil. And you should especially look out for things that have the lowest possible minimum damage and the highest possible maximum damage to really get the effects of bolstering the maximum. Right, Locus Mine support, which is getting a lot of attention and has a lot of lines of text. First up, it says supports attack skills that use bows or wands and fire projectiles ahead. The first line then says supported attack skills cannot be used with melee weapons, which I find hilarious. I think what this means is people don't read the green text at the top that has all the rules, so GGG is really spelling out for you that no, you cannot use this with melee weapons. Supported skills also fire at least one projectile, which is good because they fire 30% less projectiles. Filling the screen with projectiles is less effective when using Locus Mine. Then there's a bunch of lines that don't really matter. They deal less damage, they're a mine now, and they trigger targeting your location. They have a base detonation speed, but they can't be used within 30 units of yourself. And that's not an inconsequential amount of distance. If anything is in melee range of you, it is well within 30 units. Many things that don't count as melee are within 30 units. So this is going to lead to a somewhat awkward playstyle where you throw the mine away from yourself, wait for it to land, and then wait for the projectile to fire back at you. In theory, this could do something interesting. In practice, I have no idea what it's supposed to actually do, and I'd rather just use high impact mine support. The damage multiplier is a little lower than high impact mine support, pretty significantly if I remember my numbers from PoE Ninja, but I still don't think this is very good. So yeah, 50% less as opposed to 11. I just don't think it's worth the clunkiness personally, although again, I'm happy to be wrong here. If you think there's a really powerful or interesting build with Locus Mine, let me know down below. All right, this is one that everyone has been asking about and wondering about. Specifically, with the changes to Vengeance Cascade, were there any other nerfs? Were bow skills actually nerfed? And when it comes to things like that, my stance is always, wait and see what the numbers are. Because if you don't know what the numbers are, it's just wild speculation. And now we have them. projectiles return to you, but they deal 61% less damage while returning, which is a massive change. The original Vengeance Cascade was incredibly powerful because it said that they pierce all targets, have increased projectile speed, and return, doing full damage. Were bow builds that relied on Vengeance Cascade nerfed? Yes. Are bow builds that did not rely on Vengeance Cascade, such as Tornado Shot or Lightning Arrow, nerfed or unplayable? No. They're actually totally fine because they didn't rely on it. It was just a bonus on top. But if you're building around having the Vengeance Cascade effect for all of your damage, you'll probably want to use this as a budget option while clearing and swap to Nimbus later in the endgame. Nimbus firing projectiles randomly in some cases will be a damage loss, but in many cases could actually be a damage buff or make your clear even better. You just need to find a projectile that isn't penalized by the randomness. A good way to do this might be have Artillery Ballista as your single target, because that way it rains down from the sky and is unaffected by Nimbus, as far as I know, whereas your forward-firing Lightning Arrow is affected by Nimbus, but fires in a Nova and pretty much just hits the entire screen as a result. And last but not least, Sadism support. My personal prediction was 50% faster, 25% less duration. I was really wrong on that. Damaging ailments with supported skills deal damage 79% faster and 80% less duration, which means it's going to be very hard to get single target out of this, especially for ignites. Usually you want your ignites to roll, so that when you roll minimum damage on one and maximum damage on another, the higher one burns the enemy for its entire duration, and you have time to roll another ignite with above average damage. With Sadism support, it's going to go down to like a 1 second ignite. Maybe 2-3 seconds if you're really lucky and have a super long duration effect. So rolling is completely out of a question. But if you're going to do something like clearing a map on, let's just say, Split Arrow for your Bleed Bow Gladiator, most of the time, even just a second or a fraction of a second is enough to kill trash, and this is going to make your damage feel way more immediate. So overall, it's an interesting support. It has a place in the game. I do hope there's a little bit more support for this kind of more immediate bleed. I'd actually love something that removes ailments and deals damage based on what they would have done. In Torchlight Infinite, there's something called Reap Purification that does exactly that. It's really cool. It's also somewhat game-breaking, though, and so I can see why GGG might be a little bit hesitant to add it. But I'd love to see it, or at the very least, GGG's take on that kind of mechanic. And I do think I'll consider Sadism support as I'm playing dot builds in the future. I'll probably avoid it on Poison, and I'll avoid it on any Ignite build that really wants me to roll them. But if I have an easy way to rapidly apply them, maybe I'm a controlled Blaze build, that could be a very strong option. Then we have Devour support. I can't really think of many uses for this. It's life and mana on kill for a support link. I don't think it's good. You can see my more dedicated video from when it was first teased if you want to know more. Alright, Fresh Meat support. This gives 2 buffs, Adrenaline and Wakened Fury, when minions are first created. Adrenaline is really awesome. It makes them go faster, increases their damage, and reduces the damage they take. Wakened Fury gives them base critical strike chance and crit multi. So scaling minion crit is significantly easier, but you'll have to keep resummoning your minions as a result. I think this is a huge buff to hit-based SRS, which could make it one of the strongest league starters in the game. I mean, sure, base 3.9% doesn't sound that good, but just remember, that's 3.9% multiplied by any increase. So if you have a 100% increase, well, now you've gone to 8%. And if you have 200% increase, it's 12, so on and so forth. Crit capping with minions does seem realistic, provided you're able to summon them fast enough. You're going to need Eldritch Battery or something similar to keep up with the mana cost, because SRS definitely isn't cheap. Then we have Frigid Bond, which is cold dot for everyone. Quite literally. You chill enemies and deal cold damage over time to them when they're between you and your linked target. The base damage on this is quite good. The damage and chill linger for 2 seconds after something moves out, and modifiers to spell damage apply. So if you're already playing a cold dot build and want to link up with a friend, this is a pretty good way to do it. I don't know if this is actually going to see much use, but conceptually, it's looking pretty strong for the level of investment that you have to put into it. You'll have to maintain the mana for a link, and you'll have to be playing with a friend. But since a lot of people coming into the game ask me, hey, can I play with friends? There's definitely some Exiles out there who will be using this. Now we have Sacrifice, and oh boy is this one cool. Supports spell skills that hit enemies and have no reservation. Cannot support brands, orbs, channeling, Vol, traps, mines, totems, or minions. This is a self-cast skill. Supported spells sacrifice 20% of your current life, and then you gain an added chaos equal to 44% of a sacrificed life, which is a massive amount of flat damage, and actually exceeds both Dark Pact and Forbidden Rite, not only in terms of what it takes away from you, but what it does to you. Think about it. Sacrificing 20% of your life cannot be bypassed through any means. You can't mitigate that, you can't lower that cost. You lose 1/5 of your life. Your only option is to have something like Instant Leech, or another form of recovery to get it back immediately, and because it doesn't count as damage, you don't get to use Recoup either, unless you were truly insane and used this on Forbidden Rite. But 44% of a sacrificed life. So if you have 5,000 life, for example, that's 2,200 base damage, which is an absolutely massive amount. That's, for a support gem, quite frankly insane. If you have a recovery engine to keep yourself alive through sacrifice support, this is going to give you overwhelming damage. And I'm particularly curious to see what crazy thing Dan is going to do using this, because I'm sure he'll find a way to make it hardcore viable, and then style all over the Uber bosses with it, because they're just his playthings at this point. Last up, we've got Spellblade support. Supported skills have added spell damage equal to 135% of the damage of equipped one-handed melee weapons. This number is what I wanted to know, because I originally thought it would be 100%, and at 100% it felt pretty lackluster, especially in comparison to Templar Battle Mage. But at 135, it's genuinely interesting. If you have a lot of access to damage scaling, but very poor access to base damage, this is going to be awesome. People have asked, will it stack with Battle Mage? Probably. It's not good if you stack it with Battle Mage though, because then you're getting base damage plus base damage rather than base damage plus multiplier. Now in comparison to a lot of the other gems that I've talked about, Spellblade is both less situational, since you can combine it with just a really good weapon, and more powerful than most of the other supports I've mentioned. There's going to be a lot of builds that get massive amounts of base damage from this. It does say one-handed melee weapons, which means it can be a sword, an axe, a claw, or a dagger. And sometimes swords have really good stats, like crit multi on them. Anything with high attack speed is going to feel really good with melee movement skills, and you can even dual wield, each weapon contributing 60% as much added damage for a slight boost overall to make up for the fact that you're taking a survivability loss by not being able to wear a shield. I'm noticing more and more that there are these subtle little mechanics to enable dual wielding on spellcasters and melee builds alike, and I really like it. The only question I have is, when are we going to get to dual wield bows, GGG? I want my dual wield bow ascendancy, please. And so with that said, I'm curious. What interesting builds are you going to make using these new support gems? Leave some of your thoughts down in the comments below. If you want to watch something else, there'll be a recommendation on screen right now. I recently talked about the 10 best league starters for 322. I also have gone over several of the other recent events in terms of news and spoilers. You can catch all of those up in the card and down below, along with my recommendations of farming strategies and uses for the 16 new Atlas Keystones. With that said, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for their continued support. Link to Patreon is down below, and yes, it really does make a difference. YouTube AdSense doesn't pay that well, and most YouTubers aren't nearly as rich as the Mr. Beasts of the world. I wish I was, but I'm definitely not. So with that said, thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you again sometime soon.